So for the last 100 years of filmmaking, give or take, the film industry has been shaped like a pyramid. You had A-listers and famous directors at the top, and then their crew and assistants below, and then a wide base of beginners doing entry-level jobs so that they could learn the business and then work their way up. Now though, those entry-level jobs are disappearing as AI takes over junior technical roles, and it seems like mid-tier sets are shrinking all around us as broadcast TV continues on its death spiral. So what used to look like a pyramid is starting to morph into something that looks more like a tower. It's tall and narrow and really hard to climb without a ladder, and as we speak, AI is kicking out the bottom rungs of that ladder. But then if you can't get in on the bottom level anymore, then how are you supposed to get to the top? That's what this video is all about. Why breaking into film feels like such a challenge in today's market, but more importantly, what you can do about it so you don't get left behind. Alright, so what's going on here? Well, like I just said, it definitely seems like the traditional paths to success in film are slowly drying up. Or really not all that slowly, because it's been kind of shocking how fast the whole industry seems to have changed. The very basic version is that there is less money for fewer productions, and unless you're Ridley Scott or something, then the general trend has been that we all need to do more with less, unless you're inside that ever-shrinking circle of elite names. And I'd argue that Ridley himself is just another Napoleon-type flop away or two from finding out just how tough it is out there. Alright, but why does this matter? Well, it's simple. If there are less productions being made with fewer crew members on board, plus factoring in how AI is threatening virtually every entry-level technical position, there are fewer and fewer opportunities for young filmmakers to get in on the ground level. Like, let's say you wanted to learn to become a high-end editor and cut the next Tarantino film or something. It used to be that you'd start as an assistant editor and then you'd spend a few years prepping footage and making dailies for the real editors who would hopefully take an interest in your career and then help you develop your own skills. Eventually you'd be good enough to start taking on smaller projects on your own, and then you'd keep going up from there. But now, or at least very soon, there won't be any more assistant editors because AI is going to be able to log your footage and cut down your dailies with a couple of clicks. And realistically, it can do almost all of that already, which I'm going to talk about in another video. And ethics aside, all of this stuff will be incredible for post workflows, including mine, because it's going to save hours or sometimes even days or weeks of menial repetitive work, and also a lot of money. Like for me and the way I work with smaller teams, that's such a huge help that I'd be stupid not to take advantage of these kinds of tools. But let's keep going with that pyramid to tower analogy for a second, because for the aspiring editor, it creates a very real problem, because as that pyramid gets taller and skinnier, it gets harder and harder to get a grip on something to climb. And the same is true of so many different parts of the industry all at the same time that it really does seem inevitable that the pyramid is going to turn into more of a skyscraper with a million people all jammed into the lobby, all trying to get to the stairs and making it super hard to get to the floors above where the work is. Now, if you're incredibly well connected, or if you have a ton of money, you can just bypass this line and take an express elevator up those floors, but most of us aren't going to be so lucky. I mean, I definitely wasn't. So before we get into what you can do to adapt to this new reality, let's just take a deeper look at how these new realities are changing the career path for filmmakers. A good metaphor for the state of the industry now is the movie Snowpiercer, directed by Bong Joon-ho.
I belong to the front. You belong to the tail.
If you've never seen it, it's a post-apocalyptic story made a few years ago where a group of survivors are packed onto a speeding train that just endlessly drives through a winter landscape. The rich people all live close to the front of the train where there's lots of food and comfortable stuff, and then all the poor people are packed into the cars at the back where they live on these weird protein bars that turned out to be made from bugs. Now in the movie, the lower classes eventually rebel, and led by Chris Evans, of course, they fight their way car to car until they get to the front and take over the train. This is kinda close to what new filmmakers are dealing with today, just on a different axis, I guess. They're at the back of the train doing whatever they can to survive, and if they fight hard enough, just maybe they'll move up to the next level. The problem is that in this kind of environment, just like in the movie, for every person who makes it, there are a whole lot more who don't make it. Luckily, in the real world, they're not getting hacked up with swords like in Snowpiercer, but still having to sell all your gear and go find a real job is not ideal. Okay, so we'll ditch the train and go back to the tower, because after all, if we stand a train straight up, it's pretty much the same thing. And let's just keep going with this editor example that we already started, though it's the same for a lot of jobs out there. So again, you're an aspiring editor and you show up to the industry tower to build your career, all excited from watching YouTube tutorials and buying a new MacBook Pro to run Premiere on. But when you get to the tower and find the entrance marked editors, there's this massive line out the door that isn't moving. Like, you stand there for an hour, but it just doesn't budge. Then you notice there's a fire escape around the side that maybe leads up to the upper floors where all the editors are working, and you see a bunch of people jumping up to grab the bottom rungs. But when it's your turn, suddenly the bottom few rungs fall off because of the release of a new program that does all the work for you in a few clicks. When you look up, you can see that a few floors up, there are people working away doing just fine, but with the ladder gone and the stairs hopelessly full, you don't really see a way to get there. There's a door marked VIP nearby, and a few people whose parents work in the industry or who have enough cash to graduate from a big program with a lot of connections get to show some passes and step onto that express elevator that takes them past all the lines. But when you try and sneak onto it, security throws you out. So what are you supposed to do? That's when you notice that some of the other people who also weren't allowed on the elevator are gathering in an abandoned parking lot next to the tower, and they seem to be working on something. You're not getting anywhere in the line, so you walk over to see what they're making, and you realize eventually that they're all building these weird triangle-shaped things. You ask them what they're doing, and they tell you they're building ramps. You're a bit confused, but then you realize that once the ramps are long enough, they can be pushed up against the side of the tower, and whoever made it can then run up and jump into the window of the 5th floor where all the work is. Now, no one over here has a ton of resources to work with, so they're just using whatever they can salvage, which means the ramps are kind of rickety. Like, you can tell that they'll only support one person, and every time someone jumps off of them for the building, the downforce collapses the ramp, so you can't follow them up. All you can do is study the materials they use and then start working on your own ramp, because it's the only way you're getting in the building. Okay, so how is any of this tower or train stuff actually grounded in the real world, and what can you actually do with this weird information? Well, maybe you can see where I'm going with this already, but the only solution is to start building your own ramp, which means building a brand. And hold on, don't click away, because when I say brand, I'm not talking about starting a social media account or live streaming or anything like that. What I mean is you need to build up the brand of who you are and what you do, so that those people on the 5th floor will help you through the window when you lean your ramp up against the building. Without that, they're going to take a look at you and realize you don't really belong and just kind of push you back out. That's what a brand does for you. It gives you social proof that you need to be taken seriously by other professionals. So what does building your brand ramp look like outside of making TikToks or YouTube videos? Though that could definitely be part of it if you're into that kind of thing. But what I'm really talking about with branding is the ability to provide evidence of your abilities in whatever niche you're trying to break into. Like, if you're trying to be, I don't know, an adventure filmmaker, and you're trying to convince those people up on the adventure floors to open the windows for you, you better be able to show them that you're actually out in the world making adventure films. If you want to be a commercial director, you need to show commercials. And if you want to be a narrative editor, you need narrative short films that you've edited. Without this social proof, they're just gonna keep the window locked until your rickety ramp falls apart, and then you're back down to where you started. It's a kind of classic chicken and egg situation where you can't get the work until you prove you can do it, but how are you supposed to prove it without getting a job? And since we've already talked about how those entry-level jobs are getting outsourced to AI, there's really only one way to get around this paradox. You don't wait for permission. So what does that mean? Well, for starters, you can make things easy on yourself by finding a great source of royalty-free music so you don't get sued when you start sharing your work online, like the sponsor of today's video, Audio. Boom, seamless transition. Look, we all know that unless you're making No Country for Old Men, just call it, pretty much every film project ever will need music. Personally, I'd love to work with a composer for everything I do, but as we all know, budgets are shrinking, and I'm lucky if I can do that even once a year. For everything else, I use Audio, and a big part of that is because of how fast it is. I don't have time to scroll through a huge list of music. I want to find something that matches the vibe I have in my head in as little time as possible, and then go back to editing. With their Hans AI tool, I just tell it exactly what I like I was talking to ChatGPT, and it usually gets me exactly what I want within a couple of prompts, so it's just a massive quality of life booster. Plus, viewers of this channel get 70% off of the full retail price, which makes a year of Pro Plan just $59 with the code Luke70. It's a great deal and really useful, so check out the link in the description and use the code Luke70 to save. But getting back to it, we were talking about not waiting for permission and what that looks like. There are a ton of different ways to do this, and it totally depends on what kind of career you're trying to build, so I'll just talk about it from my perspective as a DP for premium documentaries we'll call them. Now, when I started more than 10 years ago, it's true that the market looked a lot different than it does now. There was a big buying boom as all the streamers like tripped over themselves for more content, and no one was talking about AI at all, at least not in the context of the film industry, outside some really niche productions. But at the same time, you have to remember that I didn't go to film school, and I lived in Asia and then Mexico, so I had pretty much no contact with the traditional North American film industry to begin with. And I got into the business just by making a ton of my own stuff until I caught some lucky breaks. So in other words, I built a ramp, even though in those days there were a few more rungs on the ladder than there are now. And honestly, I'm really glad I took this DIY approach because it's left me so much better equipped to deal with what's going on now. So the logical question from here is, what does this process look like and how can you do the same thing? Well, the easy but maybe unsatisfying answer is to just do anything. Like taking literally any action in the direction of where you want to go is part of building your ramp. But obviously, if you just start building with tiny scraps and no plans, it's going to take ages. So let's be a bit more specific. The career tower we're trying to climb here has a bunch of windows to choose from, and each of those windows leads to a different office. The people in those offices specialize in different things, just like you'd have in a traditional office building. One room might be for those adventure filmmakers, and another might be for music video directors, or another for fashion commercials. If you're trying to become a doc DP, but you built your ramp up to the commercial window, it's gonna be a little bit harder for them to see a reason to let you in because you aren't all that well suited to what they're doing. When the lobby is packed with all these applicants, odds are they'd be better off just keeping you outside and picking someone who really belongs. But then just a few windows over is the doc DP office, and if you just built your ramp towards them, they'd have let you in a lot faster. The point I'm trying to make here is that before you do anything serious when it comes to your career, it's always a good idea to at least have a general idea of what you might want that career to look like. In the early days, it's true that you'll have to shoot a ton of different stuff to pay the bills, and there's nothing wrong with that. But in my experience, things go a lot faster when you stop being a generalist videographer and find a bit of a specialization. That doesn't mean that you're not allowed to do work that doesn't fall into this niche, because once you're inside that tower, there's actually room for inter-office collaborations. But when you're still on the outside in a really competitive market, it's very hard to stand out at anything when you say you can do everything. Like for me, 100% of my branding is dedicated to documentary work, despite the fact that I actually probably make about 40% of my income from commercial stuff. But I only get offered this commercial work because I have an established reputation in documentary, and so they call me when they want that style of shooting. And I only got that reputation in the first place because for a very long time, that's what I've branded myself as. Think of this like the scaffolding of your ramp. You want it to point as straight as possible towards your end goal. The more it curves from that straight line, the longer it takes you to climb it, and the more it will be likely to fall down before you get there. Now, once you have the scaffolding up, it's time to start dropping down the pieces of the ramp itself. There's no rules for how many pieces you need to use for your ramp because it really depends on how big your pieces are. You could use 1,000 2x4s, or you could do it all with one massive piece if you want. It's 100% up to you to choose. The smaller the pieces, the easier they are to carry, but the more trips you'll have to make. With bigger pieces, you'll finish your ramp faster, but they take a lot more effort to drag. If it's not obvious, these pieces represent the personal projects or spec work you can make as part of your branding that prove to other people that you can do what you say you can do. So when you have enough pieces, when you've done enough of those personal projects and you have enough of that social proof that you really belong in the room, then you can lay those down on your scaffolding, you can crawl up the ramp and knock on the window. Now, the classic mistake I see is that people put all their hopes into one single massive thing, like they're planning the perfect short film that will just blow audiences away with their creativity. The problem is that big projects take a ton of time and effort, and it's really easy for something to derail them before they get finished. Just like if you decided to build your ramp with a single massive piece of wood, the energy you'd need to drag it through the forest and wrestle it in place might just kill you. On the flip side, you can choose to start with a whole bunch of very small things that are relatively easy to access and quick to finish. They might not have the same weight as the big stuff, but you're a lot less likely to blow out your back moving them. You'll have to do a bunch of trips, but piece by piece, it does come together, and before too long, you have a ramp. If this is where you're at and you're trying to grow your body of work, I'd highly suggest starting with smaller projects instead of bigger ones. Don't try to reinvent the genre or travel halfway across the world. Just start something that's in line with where you want to go, then finish it, share it, and move on to the next thing. As you get better and more confident, you try out bigger things, but don't go for broke right off the bat. Now, once you have all those planks in place, i.e. you have a body of work that's intentional and specific in the right direction, you still have one more challenge to overcome. So let's imagine that you've shimmied up your ramp and it's pointed right at the window where you know your people are working. You knock on the glass, and because of your branding, they open it up a crack to talk, but they still won't let you in because the first thing they ask is, who are you and what do you want? This is that extra thing in the path to success, otherwise known as networking, that no one likes to talk about. Just because you've gone through the effort of shooting all these projects and developing your skills in a very specific field, it doesn't mean that suddenly all the doors or windows will open, because they won't. You'll absolutely need other people to know who you are and what you do before anything happens, no matter how talented you are. The good news is that if you've done the work, you'll actually be exactly the kind of person they want to get to know, but you'll have to make them aware that you exist first. They're not gonna come to you. I've also made a ton of videos on networking already, but we can boil it down to this. Who are the people making the stuff you want to make? Where are they, and how can you get to know them? The laziest form of this would be sending an Instagram DM, and the high effort version might be taking a dedicated trip to New York or London or Mumbai or wherever to book meetings for a week. Again, I'd say start small and work up, because there's no point trying to get in the room with the VP of production for Netflix if you've never shot anything longer than 3 minutes. But however you approach it, if you want to break in these days, you better have some sort of system for telling the people on the other side of that window who you are. The good news is that if you really have put in the work of building a solid ramp, they'll take one look at it, see what you bring to the table, and if you spread your net widely enough, eventually someone will give you your shot. Because I've also been on the other end of things, trying to hire multiple crew members when I'm not really sure who to call, and trust me, when you find the right person, it's like a crazy relief. Producers and creative directors and production managers, they all want to know good people to hire, because then they can stop looking and move on to other important things. But it will 100% be up to you to make that connection, unless you get very, very lucky. So yes, the film industry does feel hard to break into right now. I'm not going to deny it. But at the same time, I've personally never been doing better, and I'm really actually excited about the possibilities AI is going to open up for my style of production, more than I am worried I'll be replaced by it just now. Because it's not impossible to make a great living with a camera, quite the opposite. There's a lot of stuff out there these days being made by a more diverse group of people living all around the world than ever before. It's just not being made quite in the same way it used to be. We're in a state of flux, and only time will tell how things will land, but my best advice to you is to stop freaking out about the size of the lines to that building and just get to work on your ramp. The longer you wait to actually start picking up your tools or picking up your camera and start making stuff, the longer it's going to take to get where you want to go. See ya.